Hey folks, Amanda here. Just a quick heads up that from time to time, the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast does include some adult language. So if you've got kids with you, you may just want to hold on to this episode to listen to a little later. Enjoy! Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast. I'm Amanda Solman, and along with Mark Jewell, your host for this show and the creator of the Surviving to Thriving movement. Each week, we'll dive into the mindsets that keep us in survival mode and learn how to get on the path to a truly thriving life. If you're looking for a wake-up call and want some valuable tools to get there, you have come to the right place. After all, survival is dead. It's your time to thrive today. Now, let's head over to the show. Welcome back to another episode of the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast. I am your host, Amanda Solman, and this week I am actually joined by a member of our team that you have not yet heard from, and that is Wade Johannes. Wade, welcome to the show for the first time.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm not sure why we put this off for so long, but I'm really looking forward to this.
Good deal. Well, I am looking forward to tapping into your expertise for sure. But before we get there, how about I just have you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself. Let people get to know you.
Sure. So I grew up at Columbus, Nebraska, and I started out farming and feeding cattle with my family. And after a few years, kind of came to the realization that the family was suffering as a result of working together, and so took the opportunity to leave in 2005. Definitely the best decision that I ever made. Probably the most difficult decision I ever made, but definitely putting family ahead of business was the right solution, at least in this case. So had the opportunity to work for Cargill as a farm marketer between 2005 and 2009. It felt, even though it was just 3.5 years, Amanda, it felt like it was about 10. And the market was extremely volatile at that time, went through just a whipsaw up and down. And through that, I learned a tremendous amount, just learning from my farmers, actually, the ones that came out, just with a clear head, and they knew exactly what their game plan was, and just executed on it. And they didn't go through all the emotional ups and downs that everybody else was. And so I took what I learned from them and applied it in a different setting. I worked for a local cooperative here in Northeast Nebraska, Central Valley Ag. It's much smaller then than it is today, but had the opportunity to lead the Pro Edge grain team there for about 5 years. And we were really focused on building long-term relationships and earning business through those relationships. And that model was recognized throughout the organization as something that they wanted in other areas. So I was asked to serve as vice president of sales, and which was over agronomy, grain, and feed, and had a real excitement about what that was going to look like. And about 6 weeks later, they announced that they were going to merge. So then everything that I thought I knew started to change. So I served as VP of agronomy sales for a couple of years, and have been with Mark Jewell since July of 2016. So almost 2 years now.
Excellent. And Wade, you are responsible for new business development here, as well as coaching. And so I know a lot of folks, when they first come to work with Mark Jewell Speaking and Training, you're their first interaction from the new relationships, which I know you do a great job at. But for today, we're actually going to lean more on the coaching that you do here as part of your role. And so for those of you who aren't as familiar with our team, we coach all sorts of folks, right? Early career, mid-career, executive level, people in their personal lives, right? We kind of cover the gamut. But I would say that across the board, there are definitely certain audiences that each of us kind of gravitate towards. I work with a lot of early career folks And Wade, I know the audience that you gravitate towards with a lot of folks that you work with are those in more senior levels, right? So, they
Right.
might be vice presidents or division directors, maybe even C-suite in those, CEO, COO, CMO, anything that starts with a C, right? Type roles. And so that's where I wanted to pick your brain today. Uh, I actually just had a podcast last week with Christina and John where we were talking about what it's like to be a young manager, somebody who is maybe in their 20s and is getting the opportunity to lead a team for the first time. But I want to take it from a little different angle in the conversation with you this week and talking more about those people at higher levels of leadership and what goes into those folks taking care of themselves and really optimizing their growth and their leadership capabilities. So, kind of to lead us in, I'm curious, what is it about senior leaders that you really enjoy working with in coaching? And I know you also do some strategic facilitation and things like that with these people.
Yeah, so I guess, first and just to start things off, I've been there. So I've been in their chair, whether it's agronomy or grain or sales or marketing, I've been in their seat. And so I understand what it is that they're going through. So I relate very well with them just because of that commonality. But, I do have self-improvement as a strength. So I'm always looking to get better. And I know on the MJST team, everybody likes to joke about how I like to collaborate. But I really enjoy learning from other people and seeing, okay, what's working here and what can we take away from this and what can we apply on a bigger scope. And so I enjoy the complexity of it. I enjoy the variety of it. And what we do impacts a lot bigger audience in terms of how we lead our team, how we lead our organizations, how we serve our customers and our patrons.
Yeah, I think the critical piece in there that I know we've had internal discussions about, there's value to coaching at all levels of your career, and I think most of the people who have worked with us would recognize that. But I also think there's no question that as you move up the ladder in any given organization, your ability to influence, the net of influence gets cast much, much wider. So,
Correct.
if you're a division director or you're a CEO, you're going to be able to influence a lot more people than maybe if you were, just a territory sales manager or a grain buyer or something like that, that might be, a little more closer down to the day-to-day action. And so to me, that's what makes making sure that those folks at the top, making sure that they're operating at their best so important, is because there's so many more people who are impacted if they are burnt out or if they are stressed out or if they are having a challenging time making decisions or things like that, right? The
Right.
impact of those stresses is so much greater. So I think that
Right.
that kind of segues into my second question, which is, as you are working with senior leaders, obviously across the board in our work, we talk about this difference between surviving and thriving, right? And that, we all have the
Right.
ability to kind of get into survival mode. But as you work with folks at those higher levels of organizations, are there certain areas where you find them especially falling into survival mode? That might show up for multiple people, regardless of the organization or the industry?
Yeah, great question, Amanda. So eh, first we need to start with, who is this person and why are they in this role? And it's oftentimes because they were a high achiever at the previous level. And so um, oftentimes we promote the best salesperson to be the sales manager. And that's something that, here at MJST, we talk through with the people making the decision, because that's not always the right answer. And yes, we oftentimes want that next rung on the ladder, but we need to look at the job description and what we're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis and figure out, is this really what I want? Or is this more about the title or, the promotion? And if we're honest with ourselves, as we ask our clients to be, oftentimes we're chasing the wrong thing. And so is there another right answer where we can utilize our strengths and have more fun doing what we do best? So I start with that. And we oftentimes, like I said, promote the person who's the highest performer, which often leads into managing instead of leading. So somebody becomes so focused on the task and getting stuff done that they're not focused on things like developing the team around them and looking out into the future, because if something starts to fall in around in the team around them, they know the job so well, they jump in and they save it. And as leaders, we have to be comfortable letting our team fail from time to time. Now we have to understand the situation and think through, okay, is this something that we can learn from, or is this too critical? Of course, but becoming a leader is a different set of responsibilities than it is to be a manager. So a couple of other things on this subject, but just becoming too focused on the P&L, making decisions that are going to get us to a number instead of doing the right things for the right reasons for the right long-term outcome. Another thing, and I know this is one of your favorites, Amanda, but improper communication, making assumptions as to what somebody knows or what they should understand. That's part of checking back in and asking questions. So people don't always believe what they hear us say, but they always believe what they hear themselves say. So when we ask questions instead of telling them, we can oftentimes get to a different end result. A couple of statements that I think kind of open up a dialogue, a two-way dialogue, instead of being told this is what I'm supposed to do. But as a leader, help me understand, how are you feeling about this upcoming project? Where are you at on this? Is there anything that you need help with? It takes more time, but you can develop your team a lot better by looking at the long-term outcome instead of just getting this nearby task done. So looking at it in terms of long-term versus short-term, it's not easy, but being very intentional about making sure that takes place. Those are a few things. And, I think the last thing that people in the senior leadership level fall short on, they're so focused on what has to get done, they lose sight of what really matters to them. So they give up on taking care of themselves, and they just, grab the burger and fries at lunch instead of, the salad, or preparing their lunch the night before, or I'll eat later. And when we do that, we can only do that for so long before it catches up with us. And that's something that I know we talk about at MJST, but the king eats first, the queen eats first. And when you take care of yourself, you're further strengthened so you can take care of more people in other areas. So those are the things that come to mind, and some things that, especially at the senior level, where we fall short.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing those. I think those are all, it's interesting because some of those are things that people at multiple levels of their career deal with, right? To some extent, there's always a need to take care of yourself. There's always a need to communicate clearly. But some of those really are pressures that are on those folks at the top of the organization. So, being driven by the P&L, being driven by the numbers, really kind of having to feel as though you need to control that thing, which makes you lose sight of really leading people. I'm curious, are there other pressures that you think are more unique to folks at the top than maybe some of the early career or mid-level management that we coach?
Yeah, great question. So I know, like at the senior leadership level, there's pressure to perform, by your supervisor, your leader, if that's the GM, CEO, whoever that is. Then you've got relationships that you need to build with your peers, other people on the senior leadership team. You obviously have people reporting to you. You have to develop them. And then because of the title and because of the area of responsibility, you're also getting pulled by your partners, by your vendors, into meetings that oftentimes it's not necessary for you to be there. And so recognizing what's necessary and what's a nice to have, and training the people around you that these are the expectations that I have on when you want to CC me into this meeting and when you want to make it mandatory that I'm there. And I think prioritizing your time is 90% of the battle at that level.
Yeah. And I bring this up because, I think everyone has pressures at any level of job, right? There's always expectations, there's always goals. But I think that's one of the things that we can do is we only, sort of see our silo of expectations and goals and pressures, and we lose sight of what other people are expected to do. And just in my experience, I think that can especially happen at lower levels of the organization or with early career folks is, it's off, my boss doesn't have time for me, or, my boss doesn't give me the feedback that I want. And something that I always try and reiterate is kind of tying back to the earlier comment, right? Like the higher up in the organization that you go, the broader the swath of influence you have, but also the broader the swath of demands on your time. You just, because you influence so many more people, you also have so many more people who are asking for your time and attention. And to some extent, the stakes can be higher too, right? So there is a greater desire to pick and choose where that time goes, or not pick and choose where that time goes, because the stakes are higher, right? If an organization isn't doing well, especially in the long run, who's going to take the fall for it? The guy at the top, usually, right? I think we see turnover at the CEO or GM level probably more often than a lot of positions, because they're responsible. And so I think it's good for people in other levels of the organization to recognize the pressures that the people who are not in their shoes go through. So just kind of that, I think that empathy can go a long way sometimes.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, to your point, Amanda, the decisions that they make, they can influence a greater area, but if it's the wrong decision, it also influences a bigger area. And so when you are a division head, whether it's, a VP or even a GM, oftentimes we take the success or failure of our organization and we take it personally. That becomes our identity. And that's something that in coaching we work towards, to help people understand that, okay, just because you're the VP of agronomy, that's not who you are. That's what you do. That's not who you are. And when you get that separation, all of a sudden the decision-making process and the stresses that we internalize start to change and dissipate.
Mm-hmm. So as you are working with some of your more senior leader clients, and I know you've done some things where you've worked with entire leadership teams, as well as coaching or guiding individual leaders within an organization, are there certain concepts or certain topics that you maybe dig into that people really resonate with, that you would want to share with folks listening?
Yeah, so making sure that we are leading the right way, and the right way is your right way. Oftentimes, well, I like to say that we judge ourselves by our intentions and we judge others by their actions. And when you think about that, I know I wanted to do that, but I got busy. But if somebody else didn't do that, we'd be upset that they didn't do that. And so having, one coaching topic that I do with all of my clients is around the subject of integrity. And it's a subject that I know when I was growing up, I was expected to understand it, but we never talked about that. And so we have an approach to that subject that anybody can connect with and have a greater understanding that essentially being recognized as a leader with integrity comes with the day-to-day actions and the decisions that you make on a daily basis over a long period of time. And so something as simple as, I'll call you back. If we don't, in a small way, we lose a little bit of our integrity, maybe not with that other person, but with ourselves. And so when you start to really dissect and pull away and tease away the parts of what it takes to build up that high character, high integrity leader, it starts with the simplest of things. And when you bring focus to that, what we find is people are more careful with their words. They reestablish what expectations are. So, Amanda, I can't get that to you by noon. I can have that to you by the end of the day. Is that acceptable? And the last thing is we tighten up our language in terms of things like exaggerating. And I like to personalize this as a way to connect with people of all levels. But, I've got a young family, 4 kids under 12. And so after about the 6th time of telling them it's time to go to bed, in the past, maybe I'd say something silly like, I'll fly you to the moon if you don't go to bed. Well, they know I don't mean that. I know I don't mean that. But in a small way, when I make that exaggeration, I'm out of alignment with who I want to be. And I use that example because it's something we've all felt that, whether it's with pets or kids or family members. But when you think about what it means to have integrity with yourself, all of a sudden that increased awareness, we execute at a much higher level.
One of the other topics that I have heard you talk about a lot, and that I think is especially relevant at the senior level management type group, is the idea of leading through change. I know you shared that with us recently, and it's not necessarily a topic that I go through with my early career folks, just because they're not necessarily always at that level to be in a real influential leadership position, at least not yet. And so I'm curious if you can kind of give me the Cliff's Notes of that idea, because I think it's one that that many senior managers will probably have to deal with at some point in time. If you look, obviously we work a lot in agriculture, and I think the number of mergers and acquisitions and, selling the business or downsizing or growing, or, things are constantly changing. And it would seem to me that it can be very difficult to be in the position of a senior leader during those ebbs and flows of what's going on. I know, some companies I've worked with in the past that were going through things like mergers and acquisitions, they're literally not allowed to tell the company certain things until everything's
Right.
finalized, which can be incredibly frustrating as an employee. But I mean, it's got to be stressful on you as a leader as well to not always be able to be as transparent as you'd like. So what does that concept entail when you teach it to some of your clients?
Yeah, so great question, Amanda. So on this subject, we just need to recognize that when there is a change, let's just say that there's a change in process, okay? We've been doing this old process for X number of years, and we were getting this result. And why are we making this change in this process? It's because we want a better result, more efficient, more whatever, save some money, save some time, but it's going to be better. But in between where we were and where we want to go, there's a big dip. And so it's important for people to recognize that when there is change, it takes more time, it takes more focus, it takes more energy. And how are people feeling? They're feeling frustrated. They're feeling angry or upset or bitter or judgmental about, why are we doing this? Okay. But you have to go through the dip to get to the other side. And so regardless of whether you are leading an organization or on the front line, I think it's important for everybody to understand that it's normal to feel that way. And when you think about, I've had the opportunity to see change at multiple levels within organizations. And it feels like, if I'm a frontline employee and I hear that, we're going to merge, okay? And this is the first I've heard of this. They oftentimes, and I've been there, we don't recognize how much time, how many meetings, how much communication, debate, discussion went on leading up to that announcement. Oftentimes it's 6 months, 12 months, year and a half in advance. And now we just get this announcement And from my viewpoint, this is just made today. But we don't understand all the back work that happened leading up to that decision and that announcement. And then from the leadership level, we need to take time to connect with where are they at in this process? Where's the frontline people? And everybody goes through that dip that I was talking about. Everybody goes through at different rates of speed. So as a senior leader, we might be thinking, all right, we made the announcement, now it's full speed ahead. And everybody at the front line is still looking at the dip that's ahead of them saying, I'm not sure if I want to go. And so I don't know if this is, actually, I'm just going to throw out a swag of numbers. There's nothing scientific about this, Amanda. So if you have to edit this out, that's your call. But essentially, there's probably about 25% of people who are going to be the front runners, and they're going to lead the change. They're going to be, this is the direction we're going. Come on, everybody, let's go. There's probably going to be about half the group, or 50%, that's going to be sitting there and saying, okay, do we go? Do we stay? And they're looking to see which way do we go. That's the tipping point. Then you're probably going to have up to 25% of your group that's going to resist change. And they're just hoping, they're just waiting for it to fail, or waiting for us to go back to the old ways. And so understanding that everybody's at a different place going through that dip, and connecting with them, asking them questions, taking time to ask for feedback. So this announcement was made, just curious, how do you feel about it? And when we ask for feedback, it doesn't mean that we act on everything that we get told, but we get to connect with where they're at in the process of going through the change. And oftentimes, people just need to be heard. When I feel like I've been heard, I'm going to be a lot more likely to follow you through that wall. But as leaders, because there's so much stuff going on at that senior leadership level, oftentimes we don't take time to ask for feedback, or we tell ourselves that we just don't have time, which if you really had to do it, you could find time to make it happen. It's just we have to be intentional about creating that space to get that feedback and be sincere about receiving it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you shared a couple of examples, this idea of leading with integrity, this idea of leading through change that I think are pretty unique experiences to those who are higher up in an organization. Maybe people kind of at different levels experience them in different ways, but to me, those are definitely experiences that I think any organizational leader will go through. And I'm curious, as you've worked with different leaders, as you in your own personal experience, I have opinions from my experience as someone more in the middle of an organization, but what do you think are some of the things that make the really successful organizational leaders different from those that really struggle or end up moving out of that role eventually?
So the best leaders are the ones that connect with the individual people in their team and respect where they're at in their own path, and taking time to get to know them as an individual. And that can look a number of different ways. But when we take time to get to know and connect with people on a one-on-one basis, the old saying that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. As cheesy as that sounds, that is really legit. That is great advice. And so, yes, it does take time, and it's not easy. But when you do that, you're going to be a lot more effective in leading the organization in the direction that you need to go. So, seeing people as individual people, everybody's at a different path, on a different path, and a different place in their path. But taking time to ask how they're doing, connecting with them as people, that's what it takes to lead an effective organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great. And I think it's something that any leader can really take into consideration. a few episodes ago, I did a podcast interview with one of our other coaches, John Anderson,
Yeah.
on the idea of leadership and self-deception, which is ultimately based on a book. But if you want to learn more about that idea of treating people as individuals who are all on their own journey, and how that relates to leadership, definitely jump back and check out that episode, because I think John does a nice job of diving into that concept. So I want to kind of keep us moving here, and the next question is really specific to coaching itself. So, like I said, we coach all sorts of people at all different levels. But I actually think, you get outside of agriculture, and the type of coaching that most people are familiar with is the idea of executive coaching.
Right.
So it's not necessarily a super new idea outside of the space of ag, but maybe in this industry where maybe not everybody, I think coaching is very new for a lot of people in general. What do you think are some of the biggest benefits of having a coach, specifically at that more senior level?
Yeah, great question. So I want to start with why people don't consider coaching. And I think a lot of that is they think of coaching as counseling, as fixing what's wrong, or I'm broken, so I need a coach. Well, when you think about the greatest athletes in the history of the world, they had coaches. Olympic athletes, they have a coach. Do you think Michael Jordan had a coach because he didn't know basketball? He had a coach because a coach helps you become better. And he can see what your potential is, not just where you're at presently. And so I love this Matthew Kelly quote, no one achieves excellence without coaching. So being comfortable that coaching is an asset, it's something to be embraced, not I'm being punished or I need to be fixed. Okay. The other thing is, we talk about the value of coaching as being perspective, feedback, and accountability. And when you're at that senior level, it's real easy to feel like you're on an island. Like, everybody has their own problems. Nobody has time to help me with mine, or to help me work through whatever the situation is. And so having a third party perspective, you look at the situation with a clear set of eyes, and you can identify things that maybe, I can't see the forest through the trees type of mentality. I'm too close to the situation. So that third party perspective is even more valuable because of the size of the decisions that you're making. The other thing, the second piece of that, is feedback. And when you think of the best coaches of all time, they didn't tell you what you wanted to hear always. They tell you what you need to hear. And so feedback is constructive, but, hey, do you recognize the fact that you're saying one thing and modeling another? And so sometimes that feedback hurts, but being open to that and understanding that this coach is here to make you get better, not to criticize or judge. And then the third thing is accountability. And I see this especially at the GM, CEO level. I'm not thinking of anyone in particular, but just simply when I get to that level, yes, I have a board of directors or owners that I'm ultimately responsible for. But if I say I'm going to do something and I don't follow through on a day-to-day basis, who's there to hold me accountable to it? And, how I show up here is likely how I show up there. And so that accountability is even more significant when you get to the top of the pyramid and, you feel like you're on an island, or I'm the only one going through this. No one is there to understand. So having that outlet is even more critical when you get to that level.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, this is something that we've sort of tapped into, this idea that as you go higher up the chain, right, the pool gets smaller and smaller. So if you look across the country, right, there's tons of salespeople, right? There's tons of frontline people. There's tons of account executives, tons of grain buyers, right? Like those people who are kind of at the ground level, in the trenches every day. There's lots of them. So if you wanted to really go out and build a network with people who are in a similar role to you, chances are you can find somebody in probably fairly close proximity, right? Who's going through
Right.
something similar to what you are. even in your organization, right? Like chances are you're not even the only one of those people in your organization. So you can create a cohort. But like if you're the CEO, you are the only one in your organization who knows what it's like to fill that seat. And even
Yeah.
as you look across the country, right, there's just not as many people who are filling that role at the top of any given organizational pyramid. And so one, I think having a coach who can bring in that perspective is really helpful. But I know that's something we've focused on here at MJST as well, is how do we connect some of those people, because we are involved in multiple businesses, and not that we're, ponying up competitors per se, but like to help people create that network of people who are experiencing similar things to them. We're going into our second year now of our Executive Leader Summit, which brings together folks in that position to help them kind of build a network of people who, beyond their coach, they can go to say, what did you do in a similar situation, or what advice would
Right.
you have for me? Because it
Right.
is hard to feel like you're on an island and that always know what you're doing or whatever.
Yeah. So when you go back to the origin of the mastermind group, it was the business leaders in the early 20th century. So, the Andrew Carnegies and the Henry Fords, the Thomas Edisons, who got together periodically and just said, okay, so here's what I'm dealing with. Has anyone experienced this before? And when you network with that with that group of people, you don't have to find every pothole in the road yourself. You can learn from others' past experience and get a different perspective and consider their feedback.
Absolutely. And I think that's actually a really good segue into the next question I was going to ask. So, Wade, I know you are a lover of all things information, whether that is books or podcasts or articles, blog posts. I've never met someone who reads as much as you do, and I love that. But out of curiosity, as you look specifically at senior level managers, senior level leaders, what are some resources that are out there that you think are really helpful for them doing, exactly what you're talking about, just outside of a mastermind group, but learning from other people who have been through what they're going through? What kind of resources would you recommend to them?
Well, and so part of this is, just how I'm naturally wired. I have that self-improvement strength. So I want to take in new information. I want to learn. But when you consider all the biographies that are available out there, I mean, it's just unbelievable what you can learn from other people who have gone through their own experience. And it's amazing to me how many times what I'm reading or what I'm listening to on audible.com, what I'm listening to applies with what I'm working on right here. And so when you start taking in different information, what I found in my own personal life is that I responded differently when the situation came up. And so, the old saying, junk in, junk out. Well, if you are taking in positive information, whether it's podcasts or books or motivational tapes or just talking and networking with positive, like-minded people, you're going to respond differently when stuff blows up at work or stuff blows up at home. And so, you're going to just handle that situation differently. And I experienced that firsthand. I haven't always been this way. And I haven't always taken time to read and to listen to good, positive information. But when I did, my career shifted, my life shifted, and there's no way I'm ever going back. There are a few books that I consider mandatory reading. And it starts with The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. I know one of our partner clients, they read that going into their senior leadership, going to an MJST live event, and it completely laid the groundwork for what they were going to do as a team. And that book is absolutely mandatory reading. Other things like Good to Great, which is, I think now 20 years old or close to that, 15 at least. That was what I had my team read when I was building them up and developing them. And when you start to take in that different information, conversations change. And it's amazing how many times that common understanding comes up in a conversation as part of the solution to how we're going to handle this. And so I think things like that. Also, I love biographies. I love learning about, Amanda rolls her eyes whenever I bring this one up, but Winston Churchill, he's got a fantastic biography. It's actually a trilogy. And get this, each one of those books is 1,100 freaking pages long. But when I was reading it, I could not put it down. And I learned so much from that and how he was making decisions and why he made decisions that, that was some of the best time I've ever spent. I guarantee by the time I'm done, I'll have read that a second or a third time by the time it's done. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are really good ones. I'm actually going to add one more to your list, Wade, because I know that this one comes up for a lot of people, and especially the folks that you coach. And that is an article titled, "I'm Not a Lone Wolf," that was put out by Bleacher Report several years ago now. And we always have to caveat that you have to read the article regardless of who the article is about, depending on your sports fandom of choice. But I know it's an article about Urban Meyer and the differences in his approach to coaching when he was at Florida versus now at Ohio State, and how as a leader he really learned the importance of taking care of himself and priorities and that sort of thing. And I just think it's an excellent resource for leaders to look at, because I think it's another place where we potentially get into survival mode as leaders is the higher up in the food chain we go, the less and less we take care of ourselves, because there are so many people who are dependent on us and dependent on the decisions that we're making. So Wade, if you don't mind, I'm going to add a link to that article, as well as some of the resources you threw out.
So as a Husker alum, trust me when I say that was the last article I wanted to read, but something kept calling me back to it. And when I finally read it, it summarized everything that we do here at MJST. And the reason it connects with so many people, especially at the senior leadership level, is because his internal monologue it's the same stuff that we tell ourselves as leaders. Come on, man, toughen up. I don't have time for this. I just need to work harder. And that's not always the solution. And so taking care of yourself, getting your own self right, empowers you to have a greater influence with the people around you.
Absolutely. So we're bringing this one in here for a landing. And so I've got one more question, and then I'll let you add any lingering thoughts. But kind of looking across your experience, both as a coach and as a senior leader personally, what's just a couple of pieces of advice that you might give to someone who's in that role, who maybe is struggling or maybe is wondering how they can grow their capacity as a leader? What advice would you give them?
Yeah. So the lowest hanging fruit for anyone, regardless of where they're at in the organization, the lowest hanging fruit is to start a morning ritual. I know we talk about that on other podcasts and in coaching, but getting up early and taking care of yourself first, although we think we need more sleep, we think we need that rest, it's amazing how that shifts in terms of how you show up on that first call and or in that first meeting. So morning ritual, it's an absolute necessity. If you look at the greatest leaders in the world, 90% of them have a morning ritual. And it's because if I wait till the end of the day to go work out, guess what happens? My calendar caves in, or something comes up, or I don't feel like it. And next thing you know, I'm not doing it. So you have to do what's most important first. So that's when I work out. That's when I do things like journal and meditate and read. And when I do that first, man, the rest of the day, it's so much easier. Somebody said it's like adding a runway to your day. And this is a new vice president, but somebody that was just promoted into that position, he just started working on a morning ritual. And on his next coaching call, his biggest challenge was to try to figure out what to do with the extra hour of his day that he didn't know that he had. You don't hear that very often. So working on yourself, being intentional about that, there pays huge dividends.
Excellent. So the morning ritual, that's excellent advice for anyone, but I agree, definitely a game changer at the leadership level. So Wade, with that, any other thoughts, any other advice, comments on the idea of coaching leaders?
Yeah. So one thing that, it's been coming up for me a lot here in the last few months, and that is, what is the culture that we're creating? So a culture starts at the top, and it can start, the division head, it can start, with the general manager. But being intentional about what it is that we want to create. I read something a couple of weeks ago, an organization does not drift into having a great culture. You have to create it. You have to fight for it. You have to make decisions based on it. And when you do, you'll find that some people align and some people don't. But when they realize that they don't align with what you want for your culture, it's time to let them go, and time to find more people who want what the culture is that you're trying to create. So I had an opportunity here a week ago to work with some, I'll call them mid-level leaders, people who are in their first management or leadership role. And I said flat out, work should be fun. And you would have thought I had just told them that the sky is green. I mean, they looked at me like I had three eyes. But as we started to talk about it, they realized, wow, gosh, it's just that's almost completely foreign. And but that doesn't happen. You have to create that. You have to do the little things on a daily basis to build that. And when you do, I think it's one of the most rewarding things that any organization can do. But it's not going to happen naturally.
Build your culture on purpose. I love it. Excellent.
Absolutely.
Wade, thank you so much for joining me today, for talking about leadership and coaching and one of your favorite topics, self-improvement. I just appreciate you coming on and joining us for your first time. I hope we didn't scar you too bad so that we can ask you to come back.
I can honestly say, Amanda, this was a lot of fun. I look forward to the next time. Thank you.
Excellent, because you're already on the calendar for another episode, so I'm not really giving you a choice.
Good to know.
Very good. Yeah. So with that brings us to the end of this episode of the Survivor's Guide to Thriving. As always, you can jump over to markjeweltraining.com. That's Jewel with 2 L's to grab the show notes and a variety of other resources. And with that, survival is dead. It's your time to thrive. Let's go get it. Thanks for tuning in to the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast. You can find the show notes and links to all the resources mentioned in this episode by heading over to markjeweltraining.com/podcast. And if you feel so inclined, we'd love it if you could head over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. That's what helps us move up in the charts so that more people can find us and start their surviving to thriving journey. See you next week.